Looking at Pete Prisco's top 100 free agents list, here are the top 10. We know Pete has spent a lot of time on this list. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens reportedly $100 million apart in their negotiations. He's also concerned that if the Ravens tag him, Lamar will hold out. So looking at this top 10, we've already talked Lamar a little bit. We're going to break down this list as we have Pete Prisco here in studio with us. Brady Quinn is at home right now. So Jackson, number one. Derek Carr coming in at number two. He spent the entire weekend with the Jets. Apparently, they went very big in their pitch. I know we discussed this a little bit yesterday, telling him that not only could they have him take the team to the Super Bowl, but he'd also be a first ballot Hall of Famer if he chooses New York. You had a little laugh about that one yesterday. Any feelings change on that? And really, if you think about it, what can Carr do to that Jets roster?
No, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, come on. Are we serious with this? Look, they'll tell him anything to try and get him there. But ultimately, you know what's going to matter? Green. He wants a deal, probably going to pay him $35 million a year. And if you're the Jets, you take a look at your young roster and you say, hey, all we need is a quarterback and we can compete. That's what you say on the surface. The reality is, even if they get Derek Carr, they're not better than the Buffalo Bills inside their own division. But he's an upgrade from what they have. I understand why they would do that. They think they can push for a division title and maybe more. So I think Derek Carr with the Jets makes sense. If you can't get Aaron Rodgers, the question with Aaron Rodgers is you don't know how long he's going to play, how much commitment is there to the team. I think Derek Carr is a better option right now for the Jets.
I think this would be plan or option, A. The first stop you'd like to make if you're Derek Carr would be the Jets. It's the most talented roster that I think a team that could, immediately compete right away if you join them. That's the first team that comes to mind, at least. Then you have to look at the NFC South, and you can pretty much pick any of those teams within the NFC South, whether it's the Saints, the Carolina Panthers, the Tampa Bay Bucks. All those teams could make some sense. The Panthers sit in the top 10 of this year's draft. However, do they find the quarterback they want having to sit at number 9, or do they have to move up to get him? Whatever the case may be, there is obviously the opportunity to go get a guy like Derek Carr to come in there and try to save the fortune of your franchise. So the Jets would be option 1 or option A in this case. I think you look at some of the teams in the NFC South as the next potential option for Derek Carr to continue to start over his career somewhere else, but with talented rosters and some playmakers on those teams.
Yeah, Derek Carr would be a good addition to any team. The Jets would be lucky to get him. Now, one of the biggest New Orleans Saints in-house free agents also figures to be one of the most in-demand guys that are out there right now, and that is Marcus Davenport. So, Pete, where do you see a guy like him ending up? Is he going to get tagged?
No, I don't think he's going to. They have cap issues. They're not going to tag him. But when I was there last summer, the people around that team were telling me he might be the best defensive player on the team. Didn't work out that way. But he's one of those guys that gets a lot of pressure, doesn't get a lot of sacks. I think maybe a new spot for him would work out. The Houston Texans would be perfect for him. They have a lot of cap room. They're transitioning their defense. D'Amico Ryan's now the head coach. I think he'd be perfect to plug and play as a pass rush defensive end. So Marcus Davenport to the Texans would make a ton of sense.
I like the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that's a team, too, if you look at who they've got currently on the roster. I know they drafted George Karlaftis. They currently have Frank Clark on the roster. But Carlos Dunlap is an older veteran player who is probably going to be moving on from at some point. So if you're looking at Marcus Davenport, he could give you that extra bit of burst that I think you're looking for if you're a Super Bowl contending team. And if not the Kansas City Chiefs, the Cleveland Browns, someone to help out, be opposite of Myles Garrett. That could help maybe get them over the top, get them back to winning more football games. Could make a lot of sense there.
How about a player like Juwan Taylor? Played at Florida. The Jags drafted him 35th overall in 2019. You mentioned him a little bit earlier and how that kind of works out with the Jags and what they're looking to do this offseason. He's spent his entire career with Jacksonville. What happens there?
He was outstanding as a rookie, struggled in his second and third season. I didn't think the offensive line coach did a very good job with him to get a new staff in there, and all of a sudden he has best season. He was fantastic. He was their best offensive lineman. They have a lot of money invested at Brandon Sheriff at right guard. They have a lot of money invested at left tackle Cam Robinson. So you could sit there and say, hey, we can't invest this much money on that offensive line. I don't buy it. You have your quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. You have to build it around him. Pay Juwan Taylor, keep him at right tackle. Then you go into the season, Walker Little, Cam Robinson. One of them could move into guard if you had to move. I think Cam Robinson would be the choice to move into guard if you wanted to do that. I think you're better if you keep Juwan Taylor. And Trevor Lawrence clearly would love to have Taylor back in at right tackle.
I'm sure he'd love to, and it makes all the sense in the world. So if he doesn't if he can get out of Jacksonville, ends up hitting the free agent market, the Chargers have to be a team you have to look at. Trey Pipkins becomes a free agent who played right tackle for them this past season. And clearly they're going to want to try to find a way to protect Justin Herbert at all costs. And knowing that Brandon Staley's probably going into a year where he's definitely on the hot seat. So protecting your quarterback, allowing him to stay healthy and win as many games for you as possible makes a lot of sense. So the LA Chargers are a team that I'd keep an eye on if Juwan Taylor hits the free agent market.
And he's durable, too. Taylor, mainstay on that Jags O-line. He started all 66 games, logged nearly 100% of the offensive snaps, so you know that he's got that behind him as well. If you look at a team like the Bucs, they have 23 players set to become unrestricted free agents. Obviously, one of those, Tom Brady, announcing his retirement, so we're down to 22 there when you look at that list. But Jamel Dean, he's one on the list. He's emerged as one of the NFL's top young cornerbacks. What happens with Dean?
Yeah, they have a decision to make. Is it Murphy, Bunting, or Dean, and how do you play that out? But I think Dean's going to hit the market. I think his price is going to be too high, and if he does hit the market, he's a young corner who can play man-to-man coverage, which I think you need in a lot of schemes. The Minnesota Vikings hired Brian Flores as his defensive coordinator. He loves to play man-to-man, loves to attack the quarterback. I think he would be a guy that would fit in perfectly in their defense. So I think the Vikings and Dean makes a ton of sense.
I like the Arizona Cardinals. You know, you're looking for a team and a scheme where they're going to play some man-to-man. That's one of them. And I think also we talked about earlier Byron Murphy hitting the free agent market. Well, you got to replace him somehow. You got a guy like Jamel Dean that would make a lot of sense in that case.
Then at number 14, we have Tremaine Edmonds, fifth-year linebacker. He's really been a centerpiece of Sean McDermott's defense over there. He's known for his size, his speed, and age, just 24 years old. What happens with Edmonds?
Yeah, and he didn't play that well last year. This year he was outstanding. And you know, I think it slowed down for him a little bit. I think it's one of those situations where you look at a guy like this, he's 24, he was young when he came into the league, his best football's in front of him. What would be a great situation for him? The Houston Texans, and I mentioned Davenport going to the Texans, but you look at, you know, D'Amico Ryans, former linebacker for the Texans, and you look at what he did with his linebackers in San Francisco, you know, with Greenlaw and Warner and that group, they could all run. Edmonds fits that profile. I think it'd be great for him at the Texans.
Great minds think alike. I'm right there with you. The Houston Texans make a lot of sense for many of the reasons you said. I also think when you're D'Amico Ryans trying to build up the culture of the Houston Texans, this is one of the cornerstones. You're bringing a guy like Tremaine Edmonds, who I think has all of those qualities and attributes you're looking for to build that locker room around. So it makes a lot of sense from his skill set, but also I think for his leadership too on what could be somewhat of a young team as they transition with a new head coach.
It's always nice when you guys agree on something. It doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
All right, on Monday, the Minnesota Vikings, they voided the contracts for both cornerback Patrick Peterson and defensive end Dalvin Tomlinson, adding a total cap salary, I think, of $8.25 million. So what's next for our guy?
Well, Patrick Peterson is, for me, he had one of his best seasons last year. But Patrick Peterson's probably not the same man-to-man cover player he used to be. And in the new scheme, they're going to ask him to do more of that. So I think that could be a problem trying to keep him. Plus, you look at the Eagles. The Eagles are probably going to lose James Bradbury. So why not replace him with another veteran cornerback? The price might not be crazy. I think you could get Patrick Peterson on a good 2-year deal. Bring him in there. Let him become the corner. They play a lot of zone coverage, or at least they did with Jonathan Gannon. Now, depending on what the defensive coordinator does, it seems to be that's what they prefer to do. I think he'd be a good fit in Philadelphia.
Look, I know Brian Flores likes to play a lot of man-to-man, but he's going to play a fair amount of zone, too, throughout the course of the season, more post-high zone. I think if Patrick Peterson could end up staying in Minnesota, that might make some sense. I would say the Arizona Cardinals, for the reason you just pointed out, Jonathan Gannon, who's now there as their head coach, likes to play a decent amount of zone, but I don't know that Patrick Peterson would want to go back there. So maybe the Eagles wouldn't end up making a lot of sense considering the fact that they should be a contender next year. And you'd think they'd want to keep at least the foundation of the defense that Jonathan Gannon built up last year and not make a bunch of wholesale changes considering how successful they were.
Thank you, fellas. Going over Pete Prisco's top 100 free agents. That list is out. You can find it all on CBSSports.com. And speaking of Patrick Peterson, you got to tune into the All Things Covered podcast. Our Bryant McFadden and Patrick Peterson discussing what's happening on the gridiron as well as what intrigues them off the field. The name says it all. Expect all things to be covered.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.